going to jump right in. This is going to be 2 parts, by the way. The first part is me holding forth. The second part is you holding forth. All right, we're going to take a little bit of an intermission and then come back, and I would love to offer you some hands-on, all right, some nosy personal questions that I'm going to ask you to write responses to so that you go home tonight with a little body of data that's generated from your own files that sort of a snapshot or a mug shot, as the case may be, of the state of your own vitality and passion at the moment. So, all right. In the acknowledgements page of the new book, Vital Signs, the last but not least entry is an acknowledgement of my mother for being a consummate role model in living a passionate life, and also for always giving me lots of material to write about. And but there's a postscript to that acknowledgement that I want to share because it has everything to do with why I have a personal interest in the subject of passion. And that is that in the last 15 or 20 years or more of my mother's life, starting roughly in her early 60s, her get up and go, as they say, got up and went. All right? This is her spark, her mojo, her life force. And I think it was a combination of both neglect and a certain amount of the law of entropy. Okay? And what that tells us is that systems tend to lose energy over time, unless, of course, more energy is pumped into that system. So in other words, a hot cup of coffee will cool down unless reheated. A clock will wind down unless rewound. Okay? Oatmeal will congeal if you stop stirring it, as will marriages. But my mother just stopped stirring the oatmeal. She slowly opted out of active engagement in life, and I think that's really ultimately what passion is about, is engagement. All right? And what crystallized this for me was a conversation that she and I had just a couple of years ago. She had been at loose ends for a good 15 or 20 years about how to spend her time since retiring from being a stockbroker. And very uncharacteristically, one afternoon she asked me what I thought she should do with her time. So I made some suggestions. I said, how about taking some art classes? And she said, oh, I did that already. As if art is something you do once and check off a list. I said, how about taking one of those music appreciation courses at the college that'll take you on field trips to the symphony and the opera, because she wasn't driving anymore. And she said, oh, those are for old people. Which just prompted me to bite my tongue at that moment. I said, how about a trip? I know you can't do the adventure travel that you like to do, but how about a cruise up the Inside Passage? Or a barge trip in Provence or something. At least you'll get out of Dodge. And she just said, nah. This is a marvelously articulate person. Nah. I said, how about volunteering with SCORE? Service Corps of Retired Executives, National Mentoring Program, right? I said, you have so much incredible experience that you could pass along to people coming up through the ranks behind you. To which she said, oh, please, volunteering? That counts for absolutely nothing on a resume, Greg. To which I said, Mother, you're 82 years old. Are you still building your resume? Are you still climbing the corporate ladder? I mean, not that you should ever give up the good fight, but Jesus. And I think it was at that moment that I realized I had to give up my own good fight. The one where I continued to cajole and inspire and nag and encourage my mother to take on some new challenges, to make some new friends, to get out of the house, to submit herself to to some of the deeper calls that come in this later phase of life. You know, just to re-engage with the world and come back to life after what I perceived to be the dual demotivators of retirement and a second divorce. Okay? Or as she put it once, nobody to do it for anymore, which is a very revealing comment, you know? And maybe a lot of people have this realization too, especially perhaps when they retire. Maybe a lot of people discover, perhaps to their surprise and not shock, that they have, it turns out, a radioactive core of depression in them that was just being held in check all those years by, if you will, the cooling towers of busy lives. And when those busy lives stop, or even just slow down, the depression comes to the fore, right? So my mother just seemed to have lost the will to participate in life. She stopped investing herself in life. She stopped investing in herself. And as it turns out, you can't make somebody do that. Even if you are Mr. Callings, you know, and your own mother has thrown your game all off. But I wondered, how does this happen? How does it happen that people lose their appetite for being in the game? And even people with so much life force, you know, and I have to put this in just a little perspective for you so you have a better understanding of my mom's situation. She was a force of nature. She was a dynamo. She was one of the very first women on Wall Street in the early 1960s. She was a world traveler, expert skier, sculptor, piano player, a published poet, reader of the New York Times from cover to cover, and mother of 3 boys. 4 if you include my father. You know, but I wondered, how does this level of passion and engagement turn into dispassion and resignation and boredom and time being torn off the calendar unused? And of course, how do you turn it around? You know, so I know this. I know that passion comes and goes. There's no such thing as a life of passion, I think, any more than there is a perpetual motion object. It's got its seasons. It comes and goes like everything. I know that life is perfectly capable of knocking the stuffing out of people, even strong people, with all of its demands, all of its disappointments, all of its just mind-numbing routines. You know, and if you're just trying to keep your head above water, if you're just one of those people who's just trying to get by day to day to day, maybe it's asking a lot to also kick up your heels. How many of you guys have ever seen the movie Dead Poets Society? Okay, most of you. You'll recognize this. I actually heard somebody say this once. She said, "I have a Carpe Diem mug, and truthfully, at 6 a.m., it does not make me want to seize the day. It makes me want to slap a dead poet." That's what she said. And I know that there's a clue in there when my mother says, there's no one to do it for anymore. You know, because psychologists talk about what they call primary and secondary motivation. All right? Primary motivation is doing something for its own sake, for the charge, the challenge of doing it. And secondary motivation is doing something for a payoff, whether it's attention or money, power, sex, fame, you name it. And I think that there's a pretty simple test to determine which one of those two is in the driver's seat. And that is that when the payoffs dry up, do you still do the work? You know, are your passions still intact? All right? I also know that one of the primary dramas in people's relationship to their own vitality, I think, is the tug of war between passion and security. Seems to be one of the primary ones. And my general observation is that in the contest between these two things, security tends to win. Passion tends to get backburnered. But I think that if we're not acting on it, expressing it, then we're either suppressing it or repressing it or depressing it. And they all mean the same thing, being pushed down. Being pushed down. But I think that the clinging to safety and security is not just a personal problem. For one thing, it's multi-generational. And for another, it's collective. I mean, I think that it's fair to say we live in a culture that likes its gates and its guardrails, likes its bailouts and its subsidies. You know, where schools eradicate playgrounds for insurance purposes, you know, and manufacturers feel compelled to put warning labels on their products that say things like, caution, hot coffee is hot. You know, or do not iron clothes on body. This actually exists. Apparently somebody tried this once, so they had to put a warning label on. Or this Superman costume does not enable you to fly. Here's one of my favorites. Remove children from stroller before folding up for storage. Do we really need to be told that? Wow. I just think that though continually opting for safety and security over passion and vitality and enthusiasm and authenticity for that matter, and in any arena, whether it's vocational or relational or creative or even spiritual, continually opting for security is not, in my opinion, ever going to adequately compensate you for giving up your passions and selling your soul. It will, of course, allow you to suffer in nicer surroundings. You know, work off your frustrations with nicer recreational equipment or something. You know. But the fact is, we don't just crave safety and security. You know, even in a code orange world, we also crave their opposite. We crave excitement and spontaneity and novelty and curiosity and an adrenaline rush, a locker at the bus station. You know, we like life to occasionally be unpredictable and full of surprises. We like to feel alive, and we know that being alive without feeling alive is kind of like eating food that has no taste to it. You know? Nor is this, by any means, just a challenge for older people. Though I know that aging has something to do with it. I mean, just, again, the law of entropy being what it is. The energy that it takes to fuel your passions may just not be in the batteries to the same degree it was when you were younger, and you can't just slap in a new pair of batteries, right? But even if there's a certain slowing down that I think does occur as we get older, just a tempering of the drive and the fight in us, I think that losing interest in life is purely optional and detrimental. I mean, I say that because I think that passion ultimately is a survival mechanism in the sense that our attachment to life depends on our interest in it. You know, again, our sense of curiosity, our sense of wonder and reverence and gratitude and participation. So I think of it that way. It's a survival mechanism. My brother Ross recently sent me an article about the mother of a mutual friend of ours whose resume reads almost exactly like our mother's. In fact, both of them were among the first women on Wall Street. And in explaining to the interviewer her strategy for staying engaged and passionate about life, what she said was, you get up in the morning, you get out, and you stay active. Now, I know this is really the stuff of cliche, but I think it explains a lot about why she's still in the game, going to work part-time in her mid-90s, and sharp as a tack, you know? So apparently there's a connection between passion and productivity and success, if not longevity, all right? There's a book out there called Corner Office, written by a New York Times columnist named Adam Bryant. And Adam interviewed 700 CEOs, and he asked them, what qualities do you see most often in people who succeed? And number one on their collective lists was passionate curiosity. Passionate curiosity, all right? And I think that's pretty compelling. So after my sobering conversation with my mom, I was all set, I remember, to congratulate myself for having fallen far from the tree. And then I remembered a conversation Ross and I had in our early 30s, all right? We were comparing notes on the various passions and pleasures we'd let slide over the years since college, all right? Wondering where they went, or where we went. And it's not that some of them hadn't been replaced by new passions and pleasures, but a lot of them were just simply the victims of neglect. So at the time, they included between us piano playing, guitar playing, camping, dancing, getting massages, skiing in the mountains that were only 2 hours away, swimming in the ocean that was only 2 blocks away, and lovemaking with our respective partners who were only arm's length away, you know, and how, you know, so we're comparing all these strategies of avoidance, you know what I'm saying, years of cultivating footpaths around the piano on our way into the kitchen, you know, like near the garden on our way to and from work, under the kayaks, which are hanging in the garage collecting spider webs, you know, and how when we occasionally came to and reached for the guitar, or the girlfriend, as the case may be, after so much time away, they'd grown a little bit cold to the touch, you know? You guys remember the Far Side comics? This might be a rough segue, but I used to have one of these in my office. It's a picture of Medusa, all right, whose hair is a nest of snakes, and there's a picture of her holding a mouse just beyond their reach, and the caption says, Medusa teasing her hair. I just love that. I wish Gary would come out of retirement. But my point is, it's tragically easy to lose touch with our energies and our enthusiasms, you know? And again, in any arena, just to let them, you know, our sense of wonder, for instance, our sense of wildness, our sense of adventure, novelty, discovery, self-expression, just to let them slide into disuse. Or, of course, get siphoned from us by all kinds of downward pulling forces. You know, fear, stress, boredom, routine, responsibilities, and, of course, a great recession and a code orange world. And I mean, it's no wonder people batten their hatches, you know. In fact, I sometimes think that life itself is so full of deterrence to passion and enthusiasm and authenticity that what we casually refer to as normal behavior is really a state of arrested development. I mean, it's just so pervasive we don't even notice it half the time. I was in the cemetery that's around the corner from my house where I live in Asheville. And I'm standing in front of a gravestone for a W.C. Stradley. And his epitaph said he led a spotless life, a triumphant death. Okay? And I stood in front of this for like a couple of minutes thinking, I would much rather see this the other way around. You know, a triumphant life, a spotless death. You know, I don't know, a spotless life just doesn't strike me as something to aspire to. I mean, I think if you don't leave this life with a few grass stains on your pants, you've missed the point. You've missed the boat. You know, and the point is not to rise above it all and wear your Sunday best all week. It's to sink your teeth into it. Let it drip down your chin. At least in my sense of it. I have this is going to may scandalize some of you, but I have a friend who has a poster on the wall in her kitchen that says, it shows a picture of a woman down on her hands and knees scrubbing out a bathtub. And the caption says, "A clean house is the sign of a wasted life." In which case I should be doing great. But, you know, the human mind is an absolute zoo of tactics for keeping a lid on our exuberances and playing it safe. You know, I ran across a young fella up at, you guys know CIIS in San Francisco? California Institute for Integral Studies, okay? And he came up to me after the presentation. He said that in his whole life, he had wanted to be a teacher and a public speaker, but that he had spent so many years, as he put it, biting my tongue, that he literally had a very pronounced scar on the tip of his tongue, like a big callus, from where he had apparently bitten it repeatedly. You know, it's just, we have so many ways of settling for less. You know, we tell ourselves that adventure is for adventurers, daring is for daredevils, thrills for thrill seekers, gambling is for gamblers. And all of these are descriptions of people who are not us. But my sense is that if we attempt to drain life of its thrill and play it safe and not take risks, I think we're gambling with our lives anyway. You know, we're taking the chance that we're not going to live to regret it. You know, because just because you're safe doesn't mean you won't be sorry. I mean, Clint Eastwood used to say, if you want a guarantee, buy a toaster. You know? So as for how we go about putting a lid on our exuberances, all right? You know, how we create the split between our natural, essential selves and our conditioned, socialized selves, and why it's so hard to kind of bridge the two again and get our spark back. Let me share this. You guys have heard of a poet by the name of Robert Bly, okay? He's big in the men's mythopoetic movement. He wrote a fabulous book called A Little Book on the Human Shadow, all right? So, and it has one of the most elegant descriptions I've ever run across for how this split happens, all right? And I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. He says that when we're 1 or 2 years old, we have a 360-degree personality, okay? Energy, exuberance, radiating out in every direction until our parents start sending us to our rooms for radiating certain parts of it, you know? I consulted with a woman last year who told me that when she was growing up, her mother, her parents, sent her to her room for any displays of negative emotions. So tears, anger, frustration, that kind of thing. Punished her, banished her, maybe more to the point, for this. So she comes to me, she's 40 years old. She, after a lifetime of repressing half of her emotional repertoire, she is naturally feeling blocked from being her full passionate self. You know, the one she's going to need to be the healer she intuits herself to be, and build a vocation around that and build a life around that, right? And she very, quite rightly, I think, describes her mission at 40 as nothing less than soul retrieval, is the term she used. I thought that was a fascinating concept. Soul retrieval, taking it back. All right? So, Bly says, every one of us carries behind us an invisible bag, okay? And whatever parts of us our parents did not like, whether it was high spirits or restlessness or tears or anything that follows big boys don't and nice girls don't, gets sliced off the pie and stuffed in the bag, okay? Then we get into school, all right? And in the service of fitting in and having report cards that say gets along well with others, you know, we cut even more of ourselves off the pie and put it in the bag. You know, Carl Sagan once described the difference between going into a kindergarten class and a high school class to talk about science. All right? He said the kindergartners, open for business. You know, avidly curious, endlessly enthusiastic, natural-born scientists. Never heard of a dumb question. The high schoolers, jaded. All right? The sense of wonder, for instance, which I personally think of as one of the active ingredients in living passionately. The sense of wonder. Relegated to kid stuff. Thing that embarrasses you to be not be the knower. All right? And of course, terrified of asking dumb questions. Then we get into the working world and to continue winning friends and influencing people even more in the bag. You know, parts of us that organizational life would probably prefer you leave out in the parking lot when you punch in. Your emotional life, you know, your personal life, your spiritual life. So what Bly says is that out of this nice round pie of life force that every one of us started this game out with, the average 20-year-old, he says, ends up with a slice. So we spend the first 20 years trying to decide what's going to go in the bag, and the rest of our lives trying to get them out again. And this is not so easy. And I remembered how not easy it is just recently. I went to visit my twin brother Ross, lives in Santa Cruz. And we, one afternoon, were walking along a forest path in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we're having a debate about how susceptible we are to cultural conditioning. It started when he made some bold declaration that he was immune to advertising. And to make a point about how susceptible, in fact, I thought we were to cultural conditioning, I dared him to hold hands with me. Until we reached a bend in the path, I don't know, 100 feet up. So he reaches out his hand, accompanied by a look that roughly translated to, I call your bluff. So there was clearly nobody around. But the next 10 seconds provoked an outbreak of reflexes that would have put Pavlov's dogs to shame. I mean, embarrassment, awkwardness, self-consciousness, paranoia, just pure conditioning. Pure conditioning. I mean, all we were doing was holding hands. We were really barely pushing a toe across the line. And all the alarm bells went off. You know, and we didn't even really dare this escapade in public. And I wouldn't be a proper twin either if I didn't report that he broke first. I'm sorry, it's just what twins do. I am by 13 minutes.
Are you identical?
No, we're fraternal. Yeah. Although somebody once told us that we were mirror image twins. I'm not quite sure what this means. Meaning I'm a lefty and he's a righty. I've got freckles on this side, he has them on the right. My hair twirls this way, his twirls that way. I hang to the left, he hangs to the right. It's just, I don't know what this means, mirror image twins.
As passionate about, blabbering as you are?
Blabbering. No. Yeah, no, he's definitely not. No, I'm the blabberer in the family. Oh, well, I'm not the only one. I've got an older brother who teaches up at Stanford, and he loves to teach. We'll call it teaching for the moment. But, so here are like 3 or 4 things that I've learned about helping to bring passion back into our lives. A few things I've learned. One is, for starters, passion can be cultivated. It can be turned on as well as turned off. All right, this is not one from the either you've got it or you don't department. Okay? And I think that this cultivation, frankly, happens most readily at the level of the moment, the gesture, the decision, not the 5-year plan, the extreme makeover. I'm sitting around with some friends one evening recently, and one of them says, what the problem is? We're not outrageous enough. So I asked him, well, so what would you do if you were going to be more outrageous? And he thought for a moment, and then he reached up and he swept his hair from middle parted and slicked back to side parted with a cowlick dangling over his forehead. I mean, just instantly transforming him from Richard to Ricardo. PhD to matinee idol. And he said, I would come into work like this. That's the level, is to begin identifying, the subtle little switches, the subtlest manifestations of the urge to express yourself and act on your passions and build from there, and just the little choice moments that take you either toward or away from your sense of aliveness. All right? Here's another one. Passion, I think, is in the risk. It's in the risk, in the willingness to step from the sidelines, whatever that means for you and in whatever arena, onto the playing field. So the act of courage itself, even one bold step beyond the comfort zone, will kickstart it. And you guys ever seen the movie We Bought a Zoo? Does that ring a bell? Well, this is apparently a true story about a family that bought a zoo. And in the movie version of it, the protagonist at one point, who's played by Matt Damon, says, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something great will come of it. I just love that line. So in other words, the horse and cart equation is not necessarily that you find your passions and then begin taking risks on their behalf, but sometimes that by taking risks, by putting yourself on the line, by making decisions, right, you begin to clarify your passions and light a fire under them. I consulted with a fellow 2 years ago who said he felt convinced that he needed, as he put it, absolute clarity before he could begin acting on a particular passion. And I suggested that the clarity he seemed intent on finding, he might only find by taking action. You know what I'm saying? So, and risk, of course, is utterly relative. This is not a comparison game. This is just, risk is whatever scares you. Whatever's capable of lighting a fire under your chair and bringing some excitement into your life, right? And it's not necessarily the big scary stuff like jumping out of airplanes or traveling the world. I think maybe more importantly, it's the stuff much closer to home. Taking your jokes and your poems to open mic night, right? Being the first to make up after a quarrel, all right? Making love with your eyes open or the lights on. When somebody asks you how you're doing, tell them how you're really doing. Or say yes to something you've been saying no to. or no to something you've been putting up with for far too long, right? Or even bundle some novelty into your days, because I think novelty is really a corrective for habit and routine and everyday kinds of trances. All right, so, and start small. This is how I encourage people is get up for a change on the other side of the bed than the one you always get up on. You know? I mean, how many times have we heard from our partners, God, you got up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, didn't you? You know? Or sit at a different side of the breakfast table for breakfast than you normally sit at. Because a quarter turn, the whole view changes. Drive to work by a slightly different route. Order something other than your usual at the restaurant. You know, rearrange one piece of furniture in your house. Listen to 5 minutes of beautiful music in the morning before logging onto your email account. You know, just little bits of novelty into your days, and then take field notes and see what evolves from that, you know? Or even just spend 1 hour giving yourself over to your writing, painting, photography, business planning, fill in the blanks, you know? Just to give yourself over to it for an hour. You guys know who Abraham Maslow is? Yeah. The fellow who gave us the hierarchy of needs, food, clothing, and shelter at the bottom, self-actualization at the top. He once said, and he's the guy who coined the term self-actualization, he said, self-actualizing types are the people who make the growth choice over the fear choice 12 times a day. And that's a bar set pretty high, actually. Third is, passion is not, I think, just exuberance. It's also endurance. Sometimes just, stamina, just incredible stamina, patience on the order of years. All right? I think this is a critical piece. You know Gladwell, Malcolm Gladwell, right? He said, who wrote Tipping Point and Outliers and such, he said that mastery in any field of endeavor requires a minimum of 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. So here's the math on that. 90 minutes a day for 20 years, or some variation of that. You know, I'm just saying that if your creative inspirations, for instance, or even your infatuations are not balanced by some good long hours at the workbench, they are not going to come to fruition. I think that's what Gladwell was getting at. You know? How many of you guys have ever performed in a play? Okay? So out of 100%, what percentage of your time was spent rehearsing compared to performing? Ballpark.
A percentage of, if we're on stage for, say, 25%, the rest of it was all
Rehearsal. So 75-25?
Yeah, and trying it out on people, like trying to line out at the grocery store to see what their reaction was.
Okay. Who else? Who else has been in a play? How about a band? Anybody ever been in a band? Isn't the percentage roughly that? Or more? Right? For some people, more like 90-10. In choir. Rehearsing compared to performing. A whole lot. But I think it's passion that largely explains people's willingness to put up with that equation. You know, just practice the same lines or the same lyrics for thousands of hours for the chance to perform it maybe 10% of the time. You know, one of my heroes, Scheherazade, she's the queen whose stories make up all the Arabian Nights. It took her 1,001 nights. That's 3 years to turn the Sultan around. You know, and I have an acquaintance who once told me that he was arrested at an anti-war sit-in once and given a suspended sentence with 15 hours of community service. And the judge said, you can do any kind of service you want. So when they let him out, he went right back to the sit-in. He said to me, I was doing community service when they arrested me. I love that. And finally, number 4, and I'll close up shortly after that. I think that if we lack passion in our own lives, or for our own lives, our other relationships are going to be denied that energy. Our partnerships, our families, our colleagues are going to be denied that energy. Our classrooms, our corporations, our communities, our congregations, I think are going to be denied that energy. Passion breeds passion. And disinterest, I think, breeds disinterest. That's my sense of it. And it starts with the one-on-one, too. In other words, one person following their sense of passion and purpose in the world can have a profound effect on the unfolding of other people's, especially if you're in a position of leadership or stewardship, and especially in relation to children and young adults. Right? So whether you are a parent or a teacher or a minister, mentor, manager, coach, counselor, CEO, I think this much is certain. Your passion is critical to their engagement. You know? It's critical to their engagement. And this is not just a personal issue, it's collective too. So you guys know about the Gallup company, right? They did one of their polls in 2012 of 142 countries. So it's a worldwide poll. And they found that on average, 87% of workers are either not engaged or actively disengaged. 13% are engaged. Okay, so not engaged means you're checked out. Actively disengaged means you are busy acting out your unhappiness and your dispiritedness and spreading the virus around among your colleagues and friends and kids and whatnot. You know, it's like if you are a part of a rowing team out on a river, all right? What this study means is that one of those team members is rowing his or her heart out. 5 of them are just taking in the scenery, and 2 of them are actively trying to sink the boat. You know? So, and then what's interesting to me is that what's missing from this Gallup poll is a category for actively engaged, i.e. passionate. There wasn't a category in that study for that, and I don't know, what does that mean? There weren't enough people to make it statistically significant? That would be significant in itself, I think. So, if dispassion is contagious, and apparently it is, so is passion, right? You know, it's just that you have to, you know, passion is equally catching. You just have to catch it first before you can spread it. All right? So let me just wind up with this beautiful little story I ran across from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Colombian novelist. He tells the story of a man who's trying to solve the world's problems. And his little boy comes running into the study and asks if he can help. And the man he's touched by the boy's concern, but he's impatient to get on with it. So what he does is he takes a map of the world and he rips it into little pieces and he hands it to the kid. And he goes, "Here, you can help by piecing the world back together." So the boy has no conception of what the world looks like. But he takes this pile of torn up paper back to his room. 2 days later, he comes running back in. He says, "Father, I've put the world back together." And all the little shreds of paper, in fact, have been meticulously taped back. And the father's, he's stunned. He says, "How did you do that?" And the little boy turns the paper over. He goes, "Well, on the back was a picture of a person. I put the person back together and then turned it over and the world was back together." Isn't that just beautiful? So, in the spirit of helping piece ourselves back together, if not the world, and again, giving you a little hands-on opportunity to look at where passion appears in your life and where it disappears, and what your life force wants from you at this juncture. After a little bit of a break, we're going to come back and do a little bit of hands-on, call and response questions, so that you can generate some information. And I hope you'll stay for that. And Thank you guys so much for inviting me. All right, so what I would love to offer is, again, a series of sort of clarifying questions, all right? And each one of these is supposed to get at a little bit of data about where your passions reside, what inspires them, what defeats them, all right? So, and also consider that most of these questions also represent strategies for bringing passion back into our lives. All right, just to keep that in mind as we're going through it. These are actual, in a sense, actual how-tos as well as questions. So, a couple of suggestions for responding to the questions. The first one is shoot from the hip. All right? How many of you guys have ever been told you think too much? Okay, so I want you to try to make kind of an end run around the left brain and generate some more or less unfiltered data. Okay? The second suggestion is be as specific as you can in responding to the questions. Because I think the more specific, the more useful the information will be. All right? You guys are familiar with Lily Tomlin, right? She has a famous monologue called The Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe. So there's a line in there where she says, ever since I was a little girl, I always wanted to be somebody. And now I see I should have been more specific. Okay? So this is about being specific. And the third suggestion is write the questions down. All right? Just so if you happen to be looking at these these notes a month from now, that'll just simply make more sense to you. Okay, so here's a first question. Jean Houston, does the name ring a bell? Yes. Jean Houston, mythologist, psychologist, author, wrote a book called The Passion for the Possible and a dozen others. She once said that people who are described as larger than life are not that way because they are physically imposing, because they are heroic or charismatic or living their lives on grand stages or at the head of revolutions. They are that way because, as she puts it, they are profoundly present to the stuff of their lives. That's the way she puts it. They're profoundly present. In other words, they're cooking on more burners. They use their senses more than most people. They inhabit their bodies and their minds more than most people. They love novelty more than most people. And they are attentive to not just all the challenges of life, but the pleasures. And I was struck by her saying that. So the first question is, I just want you to write a list. And each question, I'd like you to do it in a minute or two max. All right, just for the sake of expediency, but also to be more spontaneous. So my first question is, write a list of pleasures. Pleasures that are part of your life, okay? So, eating chocolate mousse, all right? A hot bath, spooning with your dog, okay? Whatever. Just make a list of very specific pleasures and be specific. Don't say friendships. Name names. Don't say nature, name places. A list of pleasures. All right, next question. The original definition of the word adventure was something about to happen, as in Advent, celebrating the birth of Christ. Okay? So a sense of adventure, I think, is related to a sense of anticipation. All right? Which I think is helped along immeasurably if you always give yourself something to look forward to. Okay? So, my question, name a few things that when they come up on your calendar always fill you with a sense of excited anticipation. All right? So this could be a meeting with your women's group. This could be a golf game at the end of the week. It could be a road trip with your camera. It could be a vacation. Anything. A list of a few things that, when they come up on your calendar, always give you a sense of excited anticipation. All right, another question. Any of you guys ever been to Italy? Marvelous. I had a wonderful, rare opportunity some years ago to spend a month in Italy wandering around day and night through what turns out to be the highest concentration of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the world, that country, all right? And through the ruins of the Roman Empire, which amaze me the same way that dinosaurs amaze me, that such a thing once existed. All right? And in fact, I build most of my vacations anymore around places where there are great ruins, because they never fail to give me the experience of wonder and awe, which I think of, as I mentioned, as critical to a passionate life. All right? So my question, what wows you? Name a few things that predictably wow you. Musical and artistic genius, the birth of your children, right? The view from the top of skyscrapers, encounters with wildlife, whatever. Write a few things that predictably wow you. All right, another question. Just as a process point, I normally, when I do any of my workshops, there's a lot of back and forth. Almost every other question or so, I open it up to hear all these wonderful, juicy responses. And the only reason I'm not going to do that this evening is for the sake of time, because I think I'd rather give you the questions and give you a chance to write them down than to hear, especially with a group this large, we wouldn't get out of here till midnight. So anyway, I wanted to share that. All right, next question. You guys have heard of the concept of a flow state. All right, when you're in a flow state, you're utterly absorbed. You're intent, you're absorbed, you lose track of time and space and bodily needs and appointments, and you're content even when it's difficult. So, my question, what typically gives you the experience of a flow state? What activities or involvements? And if you can't think of any in present time, when was the last time that you remember doing something that put you in a flow state like that? But write a few things that typically do that.
Preoccupied?
Well, it's not even just preoccupied, it's occupied with great intensity, where you just, everything else in the world just falls away. Whatever it is, whether it's working in your basement on woodworking, or writing a book, or playing with your child, anything that just makes you you're in a flow state. You're in the zone. I had a conversation not too long ago with my 13-year-old niece, and it culminated in her standing in front of me, rolling her eyes, and saying, as only a 13-year-old can say, "That is so last week." And there must be a more grown-up response than the one I gave her, which was, "What? You're like what? You're like a 7th grader who still has stuffed animals on her bed, which is like so 6th grade." I'm not generally into shaming small children, but she started it. But part of the reason it stung was that I sort of pride myself on having my finger on the pulse, at least of my own life. And I think that ability to have a feel for what is happening, or what wants to happen, is part of not just doing what Gene Houston referred to in Living Larger Than Life, but having a feel for what wants to emerge in your life at any given juncture. All right? So what I'm going to ask you to jot down is just an intuitive sense. Don't think too much about it. What, if anything, is trying to emerge in your life right now. And in any arena, creative, vocational, relationship, spiritual, you name it. Name a few things that are trying to emerge as far as you can tell. Another question. Are any of you guys familiar with something called the Institute of Noetic Sciences? Oh, wonderful. This is down in, I thought it was Sausalito. Somebody just corrected me and said it's Petaluma. It is Petaluma. Oh, okay. So, and do I have it right? Noetic refers to consciousness studies primarily. Okay, so the Institute of Noetic Sciences has the world's largest database of spontaneous remissions. All right? They have 3,500 cases from physicians all around the world of what are called remarkable recoveries from disease, those that cannot be explained by medical treatment. All right? And I did a story years ago. Remember Omni magazine? That popular science magazine? I did a story on that database for Omni, and I went and spent some time with it. And one of the things that really jumped out at me about that body of remarkable recoveries is that in, I think, a statistically significant number of cases, what immediately preceded the spontaneous remission was a profound and affirmative personal change in the life of the person it happened to. A profound and affirmative personal change. This could be a revelatory experience. It could be a reconciliation with a long-despised parent. It could be taking radical responsibility for your life for the first time. Or it could be accessing some long-denied passion. You know, what the poet W.H. Auden calls your foiled creative fire. I love that phrase. So, my question, is there some profound and affirmative personal change you could make, or perhaps even should make, that at the very least would have a healing effect on your life, if not your body? If anything comes to mind, jot it down. Yeah. Is there some profound and affirmative personal change that you either could or should make that would have a healing effect on your life, more than likely? I'd like to share this before I move to the next question. For anyone who doubts their ability to make radical change, I believe that we are all masters at making radical change and don't, in many cases, remember it. So I just want to read you this paragraph. In the 9 months you spent in utero, you personally went through the entire process of evolution over billions of years. You went from a one-celled organism to having rudimentary gill slits like a fish, to having a rudimentary tail like a mammal, and to finally being a full-fledged human being. We are shapeshifters of the highest order and carry within us the innate knowledge of how to make radical change. Just saying. So, another question. Years ago, my brother and I fell into a conversation about what superpower we would choose to have if we could have a superpower. And at the time, he decided on the ability to speak any language on Earth. And wouldn't that be fun for us travelers? And for me at the time, it was the ability to lay my hand on any book and instantly absorb everything in it, which in my profession would be worth a king's ransom. All right? So, if you were granted a superpower, and think broadly, what constitutes a superpower, all right, what would it be? And just go with your gut. Don't think too much about it. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? All right, you can see why I'd want to hear examples from everybody. These kind of questions can be so juicy. All right, so here's another question. You guys, anybody heard of Arnold Mindell? Does that ring a bell? He started something called process-oriented psychology. And he's a genius, in my opinion, at body-mind stuff. And if you're into body-mind stuff, you really should read this fella. He's really remarkable. And I interviewed him for both of my books. And one of the things we talked about was passions and callings that come through the body. Okay? And he said something that was stunning to me at the time that I heard it. He said, symptoms are usually dreams trying to come true. Now, there's a provocative idea. All right? So, and frankly, at the moment, I'm not even asking you to believe it, but I want you to take a shot at this question. 2 parts. Part 1, write down some recurring symptom in your body. Any recurring symptom that has your attention. So, everybody got something? Here's part 2. I want you to give the symptom a voice and let it fill in the blank. Okay? Now, this is your symptom talking to you, saying, my dream is that you would fill in the blank. And don't think too much. This is literally about the body. Go with the gut. The symptom is talking to you, saying, my dream is that you would, and see what you fill in. I did a presentation some years ago at a writers' conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After my presentation, I went out into the lobby and was chatting with people and signing books, that sort of thing. This woman walks up to me out of the crowd, and a complete stranger to me, and says, one of those things that people won't typically say to you unless they're pretty damn sure they're never going to see you again. She said, do you know why I'm so fat? This is not a question you're supposed to answer. And then she answered it. She said, it's because I have so many stories inside of me that I'm not writing down. Okay? So there's an example. This woman, and I'll tell you, there's no science or philosophy I am aware of that could dispute a self-diagnosis delivered with that kind of certainty. You know what I'm saying? The woman knew her symptom in the sense that it was a sign, and that's what the word means, meant something, and she knew exactly what it meant. She knew her body was trying to tell her something, and she knew exactly what it was. So the dream in the body was that she needed to be writing more. And as she put it, this is a symptom that's pushing out from inside me, is the way she puts it. So here's another question that relates to Arnie Mindell's work. We were talking about restlessness. And he said, restlessness is literally about movement. Consider the word, restless. All right? And he says, the question to ask of anywhere in your life where you are restless is, what wants to move? And where does it want to go? So my question to you is, if you can identify any place in your life where you feel the most restless, answer the question, what wants to move and where does it want to go? Just go with your gut. What's trying to move and where? You guys have heard of restless leg syndrome? How many of you guys have ever had a bout of it? Okay, 1 in 10 Americans has it, according to the literature. So that means 35 million Americans has this symptom that they describe as it's a difficulty in sleeping or resting, an urge to move, and uncomfortable feelings primarily in the legs that people typically describe as creepy and crawly. Okay, and the fact is that the literature also says that getting up and moving actually offers immediate relief for most people. I've had a bout or two of it, and that's exactly my experience. And the fact that getting up and moving offers immediate relief suggests that movement may be part of the cure. Now, unfortunately, there are drugs for restless leg syndrome. as there are for almost everything. And but the problem is, of course, like a lot of drugs, they treat the symptom, but not the source. Okay? So, an example. I was having, one of the very few times I've ever had this, tremendous bout of it in the months leading up to hitting the road for the new book. And I had spent 10 years writing that book. And by the time it ended, I was so bloody restless that I was having all these symptoms. And I looked them up. It was classic restless leg syndrome that stopped the instant I hit the road. So clearly I was ready to move. I was ready to do this now after being alone in a room for 10 years with this book. So, yeah.
That's exactly what I wrote.
Oh, is that right?
My legs and I need to travel.
Travel. Absolutely. You know, Arnie Mandel had this, a consultation with one of his clients. They were in Dublin at the time, and she comes in and she says she's depressed. But her legs are going like tuning forks, you know, like some people do. And he says, you know, I'm not sure you are depressed. I think there's a lot of energy you're sitting on. What would your feet do, he said to her, if they were free, if you could get up and do anything you want? What would your feet do? She stands up and she does a jig. She does an Irish jig, and while she's doing it, she's talking, all right, because that's part of how he works. And what comes out is, I feel like I have a tremendous amount of energy I'm not permitted to express in public. You know? So there's something to that. Dance in the shower. Woo, have a good rubber mat. That's all I can say. The term mentor comes from the Odyssey by Homer. And mentor was actually a person. There's an old man named Mentor whose job was to educate Ulysses' son while Ulysses was off at the Trojan Wars. And so if you were granted a mentor right now in your life to help counsel you on living the kind of life you imagine for yourself, to come back to whatever state of vitality you want for yourself in any arena or overall, who would you pick and why? If you were granted one mentor, dead or alive, animal, vegetable, or mineral, who would you pick? And by why, I mean just a sentence about what that person would offer you. Name a movie that you have watched repeatedly. Some movie you've watched repeatedly, and in a sentence fragment, what the movie is about. In other words, what's the theme that continually draws you again and again? The talk show host Larry King was once asked, who makes a great guest for your show? And he said, well, you've got to be funny, articulate, self-deprecating, and you've got to have a chip on your shoulder. Some grudge, all right? And I'm not generally into encouraging people to nurture their grudges, but I do want to acknowledge that they are a source of power. Sometimes righteous anger, sometimes tremendous action can grow out of a chip on your shoulder. I'll give you an example. I spent most of my childhood on Ritalin, okay? And I didn't find this out till my early 30s. And as you might imagine, that was pretty upsetting news. That I'd been drugged against my knowledge. My mother said, we slipped it into your morning milk. So that's a chip I have on my shoulder about having my natural exuberances suppressed. From the outside, suppressed. You know, this was Mother's Little Helper. It's just that she was giving it to us instead of taking it herself. You know, but the fact of the matter is, it explains both of my books. Callings, In Search of an Authentic Life, Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. The fact is that, you know, I honed that grudge into two books that are about reclaiming your vitality, right? So, if this speaks to you at all, this question, write down some chip you have on your shoulder. Something you're ready to go to the mat to at the bat of an eye. What I'd like to ask you to do is skim through the responses that you generated to the questions and look for, circle any recurring themes. Any word or phrase or action item that recurs, circle it. What you're looking for is patterns. Even just in the dozen or 15 questions I asked so far, I normally have about 50 of them.
Well, that was the 12th.
That was the 12th, okay. So just skim through and circle any themes that recur. All right, so whatever you circled is, if your experience with these questions is anything like mine has been over the years, something that is clearly hankering for attention. All right, this is some parts of us that want airtime. All right, so what I encourage you, if nothing else, to do with this material from this moment for the next perhaps even few days is to find ways of sharing it with people. Go public just a bit. And find ways of talking about it, and just kind of giving it a little bit of air, all right, a little bit of attention, and take good care of yourself in terms of how and who you share it with, all right, because one of my favorite self-sabotages over the years has been blurting out some newfound enthusiasm to my most cynical family member. You know, you might as well just disembowel yourself right on the spot. Because what's going to happen at that point is that the cynic is going to do what they do. You know, they're going to find all the problems and all the obstacles and they're going to ask you all those devil's advocate questions that always tends to be a little heavy on the devil and a little light on the advocate. You know, at least the way most people play it. Or at the very least, I think you need to know that with this kind of material, you need to start with the easy customers and work your way up to the tough ones, not the other way around, unless your unconscious objective is to sabotage yourself, in which case I will vouch for this. It'll work just dandy. Okay? But take good compassionate care of yourself with some of this, if there's any new information in here for you. So once again, I really want to thank you, Andy, Harper, so much for bringing me, and Spencer, thank you guys so much for making this evening happen. And thank you guys for coming out and sharing. Thank you. And I wish you guys great